overflow of people that fell from those approaches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that makes sense. And so I was reading actually one of your articles on your website, just kind of as I was doing like some research and refreshing some of the content that you put out there. I was reading an article that you talked about kind of bulletproofing your back and whether or not, in order to do that, you need to develop more absolute strength or strength endurance of the musculature and the trunk musculature. And I thought that was a fairly interesting thing, and I don't think that necessarily it's something that's discussed probably as often as it should, um, because you always hear like what it was the expression like weak things break, therefore you need to be really strong,
Right.
and it's like that's super important obviously, but then also there's like an endurance factor there as well, right? Especially if you're doing lots of heavy training, building into a big meet or something like that. So I was wondering if you could kind of discuss that in a little bit more depth, and then also potentially touch on how you might implement that from like a programming standpoint and how those variables might change depending on where you are in your competitive season. Obviously, you can't be super specific, but just kind of a big picture, principled perspective on it.
Yeah. Um, so it's about spine endurance, muscular endurance, like protecting the back. So if you look at the studies for people that generally hurt their back, it's due to fatigue and then a breakdown in form, whether they're loading boxes at work or they're picking up something around the house or they're lifting weights. It's usually due to a lack of stiffness or a lack of endurance, and then the muscles buckle and you end up having the injury. So we approach the training by building stiffness with static exercises and not the bending over and over exercise that you see bodybuilders do or whatever. And that has its reasons too. But we want to be able to build muscular endurance in the positions that we're going to need to be in for a squat or for a deadlift or something like that. But for someone a little different, they might want to approach it a little bit differently for their different sport. But for powerlifting and strength training specific, having the locked in building super stiffness under load is what's worked great for me. Not just rebuilding my back, but being able to make my core super endurable and being able to keep it locked in under time without any buckles or micro movements. And it's been able to help dozens and dozens of people get out of pain or avoid pain and take their training up to the next level. Now, I'm not saying that if you bend your back and do cable crunches or reverse hypers or hyperextensions, your back's going to break and it's going to be weak. There's a lot of different factors that go into this, namely the type of collagen you have in your discs, the shape of your disc, how lucky you are and how much you're bending and flexing, how big you are. There's different things that go into that. So there's plenty of people out there that can bend and flex and still build an endurable core. But we do know that eventually some people will stress their annuluses and start to build disc bulges from bending and flexing under load with compression. Um, that gets some people, not everyone, but it gets some people. So the way I build a core, if I'm training a power lifter, I like to do suitcase carries where you create a little bit more compression on the spine by holding a kettlebell in one hand, then maybe go to bottoms up. Bottoms up carry works the grip a little bit more. Any micro movements in the core, it's going to want to move the kettlebell a bit. Um, Stir the pot and their variants, planking on a Swiss ball, doing small circles, going north, south, east, west. Of course, the big three. But a note on the big three is most people that do the big three, even like pro athletes that I see, or even like good power lifters that seemingly have a strong and rigid core, they don't do for instance, the bird dog right. They don't hold it for 10 seconds. And it's not like it's this glamorous, super hard exercise, but most people struggle to do it right, and then I tune them up a little bit, and they say, "Oh, now I feel like I'm actually getting something out of it. I'm getting a more posterior chain, core stability, and then you go to the side plank, you lock that in properly, you get the lateral, and then you do the curl up or a dead bug moderated variant. You get the interior core a little bit too. But I like to do any type of static. Good mornings can be good too. The what happened there? Something.
It just cut out a little bit, but I heard everything. You're
Okay.
good.
Um, but I like to use static. Um, stiffening exercises that won't soften up the disc for someone who's trying to be brutally strong, and that will build as much stiffness, not just in the back muscles, but in the disc, so it can bear load better. And that's the way I like to train it, man. Before and after training, a warm up with maybe some suitcase carries, a couple like big three. You do your normal workout, whether it be a squat, deadlift, or bench day, and then end. Maybe some stir the pot, maybe a couple bottoms up carries, maybe some sled drags, maybe something like that. But there's really all kinds of different variations and ways to make the exercises harder. But that's the things that I like to use to build the core
Mm-hmm.
and bulletproof the back.
So you mentioned,
And
sorry, what was the
bulletproof
last
the back.
one?
But there is no true bulletproof in anything. If you lift heavy enough and you have some kind of movement under load, things will blow apart. But you lessen your chances to move under load by building that stiff, endurable stiffness. Is the word I'm looking for. Endurable stiffness under load.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, do you find it all that, because I know in your article you mentioned doing it before as well as potentially after, so like as part of your prep work, part of your cool down, do you find that if you do it before, that fatigues an individual, and so it hampers their ability to actually maintain rigidity during the lift, or like you're just talking about going like fairly light or kind of progressing into something?
Well, if the lifter's getting fatigued just by doing a couple core exercises, then he probably shouldn't be under the bar. But with that caveat, yeah, if I beat someone down with a bunch of McGill Big Three and they're fatigued, that's not going to serve them right. So it'll just be a little bit. So we won't give them a heavy dose before. I might have them just do a couple per. Three bird dogs, 10 seconds, side plank, curl up, and then maybe build it up over time. So it's going to be the right dose for the right person, of course. So yeah, to your point, you do
Mm-hmm.
too much core, then you are exhausted, you're tired, and then when you're fatigued, you're more likely to buckle and move under load, which isn't good anyway. So a little bit can prime it, right? You stiffen the core a little bit, which will help unleash the distal athleticism and the ball and socket shoulder and the hips. So that can be good, but too much of anything can be a poison as well. So I like the priming it at the beginning of the workout, and then at the end, if you got a long car drive and you have some achy back sometimes, it might not be a bad idea to find a little bit of a hack before you get into the car after a squat and deadlift session and drive home an hour. But everyone's different. The stiffening might be
Mm-hmm.
bad for them at that point, or it might be good. Everyone's unique.